Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Talks at Google. My name is Sachit Egan, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I have the distinct privilege of welcoming back to Google Ashlee Vance. Now, Ashlee is a senior writer at Bloomberg Businessweek, and he is now the author of two New York Times best-selling books. His first book was Elon Musk, a biography of Elon, published back in 2015. And today we're going to be talking about his latest book, When the Heavens Went on Sale. But Ashlee is so much more than just the writer of best-selling books. He's also now an Emmy-nominated host and writer of Hello World, a fantastic series. One of my biggest plugs today is if you haven't checked out Hello World, please do so. I think they have a new season coming out next month. And he's also now producing some upcoming documentaries with HBO. Now, today's talk is of personal satisfaction for me because 8 years ago, when I was still a young whippersnapper at Google, I had the privilege of meeting Ashlee and moderating his talk about that biography of Elon Musk. And so it was a great thing to get the band back together to talk about his second book. So without further ado, let me welcome Ashlee to the call. Hey, Ashlee,
Hey,
thanks
man.
for being here, man.
Thanks for the kind introduction. And it is fun to get the band back together.
For sure. Well, we were talking a little bit beforehand, but it's been a pleasure for me to see your career. I'm going to use the word blossom in the past eight or so years. You've gone from writing books and feature articles to hosting shows to producing shows. Tell us how that all came about. Was that always the plan, or how did these things unfold for you?
It was definitely not a coherent plan at all. I did right after, well, when you and I talked, when the Elon book came out, I think I just spent so much time working on that and I wanted some other outlet for a little bit. And, most of my day job is writing for Bloomberg Businessweek magazine, and I do these long magazine feature stories, and I just noticed, some of them it felt like would play well as kind of a TV show. I mean, I like to think I can write well, but some of it just felt very visual and like you had to be there with me. I noticed there were like 1,000 food travel TV shows, and maybe somebody should do a tech one. So I kind of stumbled into that and making Hello World, and then that just led me. I really do enjoy now making films and TV shows, and it sort of dragged me in that way. And just in relation to it being a book talk, books are such a solitary, lonely process, and so it was nice for me to have something like Hello World or a documentary where it's a team and you actually have people to collaborate with as you do it.
Sure. Well, I don't think there's any set cadence for when authors publish or put out new books, but 8 years is a good chunk of time. I know you've been working on other projects. Did you expect it would be this long or this short before the next one came out?
I did not expect it would be this long. This is a book. So the new book is all about the rise of commercial space. It sort of came out of my reporting on the Elon book. Just SpaceX was one of my favorite things to research and report about. And right when I finished that book, the commercial space industry, it just was clear to me that something really interesting was going on. There were rocket companies all over the world, satellite companies all over the world, and so I started digging into them, almost just not like a hobby, but as a reporter, and then I wasn't sure it was a book, and then it blossomed into one. Space, aerospace always takes longer to do anything than what they say will happen. And so part of it was a function of just watching these companies. I mean, it took them, I researched this for like 5 years. So there was a little gap where I was making Hello World and just doing my regular job. And then I really worked on this one for about 5 to 6 years. And it's just how long it took. It got into a bit of a obsession.
I mean, it's perfectly understandable that the volume of characters, of misfits in there, the depth that we get into the lives and the personalities of the different characters is fantastic. Clearly understandable that it would take some time to put that together. I'll tell you this, when the note came through my inbox to get together and do this chat, my first thing was, oh, great, I get to work with Ashlee again. My second thought was, okay, When the Heavens Went on Sale. I've relocated to Seattle since we last got together. I have a bunch of friends who work for Blue Origin. I figured Blue Origin's going to be in this book. Elon's going to make an appearance again with SpaceX. And I was a little surprised. The book focuses on a bunch of companies and people that I hadn't heard about before. Could you tell us a little bit about that choice of focusing on perhaps lesser known innovators?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I kind of purposely tried to do what I, for lack of a better term, would call the Wild West of space. And you had these 3 to 4 billionaires that were dominant, Elon and Jeff and Richard Branson and a little bit of Paul Allen in there. And, they'd had different degrees of success. I mean, quite frankly, Elon and SpaceX have really lapped the field and done much better than the other billionaires. But what was clear to me was that there was this new brand of company, new brand of engineers all around the world who had seen what Elon and SpaceX had done, and I describe it in the book as like unlocking this passion for space that I think it had died down. Space had been kind of boring for a while and very much the same for a number of decades, and so I really wanted to run around and capture that enthusiasm. I mean, it's a totally new era where you had just a handful of governments that controlled space for a very long time. And so what I found interesting was individuals popping up. Like, there's one of the main characters is this guy Peter Beck, who runs Rocket Lab. They're based in New Zealand. He had never even gone to college. He had a rocket company. It was way more successful and far along than I imagined. New Zealand has no aerospace history at all. And so once I started seeing these kinds of people popping up, I realized there were just these incredible stories that people had not heard about. And to your point, I mean, you could argue this is like 4 books in one. There's sort of 4 distinct stories focusing on 4 either companies or individuals, however you want to describe it. And that really, I think each one of them is a very unique character and unusual and not at all like what people think of as traditional space. This is like a whole new era.
Absolutely. I love that you use the phrase sort of the wild west of space because that's something that came to mind very quickly when I started to dig into the book. And it made me think about this band of misfits versus the old guard. I think is a phrase that can be used to reflect like these big government agencies, NASA being kind of the obvious one. Could you talk about how this new guard is just different in every way?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like from a technology standpoint, a lot of this is about having a clean slate to go at rockets and satellites, and obviously making things cheaper and more modern than they have been in the past. I mean, SpaceX clearly did this, and now it's being taken in different directions. But you can make a pretty strong case that space, like I mentioned before, not only did it get boring, it was kind of behind the times technologically. You had all these specialist space companies that made like space grade radios and antennas, and they tended to be government contractors who had had this job for 30 or 40 years. Moore's law really had not made it to space. You didn't send the most modern computing equipment because people thought it might not work, and so you just sent this old stuff that had been tested. So part of it is just this technology story, and finally turning to consumer electronics and modern software and like the Silicon Valley approach to space. And then part of it is the people. Yes, you still have some MIT PhDs. I'd start it like this. Like, I think almost every space story you've ever heard is usually centered on either something going really wrong, like Apollo 13 or gravity, but usually it's like our best and brightest people, and it's a room full of like 1,000 courageous geniuses. And as I went around these companies, yes, of course, there's smart people doing aerospace, but it was a totally different cast of characters now. I mean, this is um, like a regular job is probably not the right way to put it, but you've got welders from Texas, you've got like ex Navy SEALs working on this stuff, you've got a lot of people from car racing teams who have moved into aerospace. It's a lot of like mohawks and loud music, and this is why I wanted to write the book. This was like the first time I to me this was clearly the new reality of space, and I'd never seen it depicted before, what life was really like.
Interesting. This is kind of a random question, but when you describe all these different characters and you're thinking about, hey, could this be a book? Was there any moment on the travels and the meetings where you thought, wow, this is surprising. I didn't expect that this is what the new frontier of space exploration would be like. Is there any moment that comes to mind?
Yeah, there's kind of a bunch, really. Like, I mean, Peter Beck, the Rocket Lab guy, it's just he literally didn't go to college. He worked at a dishwasher, appliance maker as really like an intern, and you just don't see people like that running rocket companies historically at all. This book carried me to places like Ukraine, where I got to go to the old Soviet rocket testing facilities and ICBM factories. And I was there with this guy named Max Polyakov, who was a OBGYN turned software magnate turned rocket maker. I mean, this was a very unusual story. There's a company I write about, a rocket maker called Astra. They were top secret for a number of years, and I was with them from day one, keeping their story to myself as I was reporting. But like directly to your question, I don't even, there were some of the higher echelons of the US government that did not even know that this company existed. And I just thought this would be impossible. They were basically making a missile in Alameda, this small town in Northern California, right next to a residential neighborhood. I thought people would notice that this thing was kind of growing in the backyard of the company, and it stayed secret for a long time.
Oh my gosh, I know Alameda pretty well. There was some Google stuff out there that I used to be involved in, and wow, that's crazy. You've highlighted a bunch of different characters that I could ask about. I mean, let's start. You've mentioned him a couple of times. Let's start with Peter Beck. We've talked a little bit about him being kind of a true rival to Elon, but being completely different from Elon. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we see SpaceX in the news all the time. And after SpaceX, even though there's a number of commercial rocket companies, the only one who's even anywhere close to SpaceX is Rocket Lab. SpaceX has launched, I think, around 280 times, Rocket Lab's up to 40. After that, you get to like one or two. I mean, this is a company that is, their rocket is not as big as SpaceX is. So, in some sense, not a rival. But if you were talking about an actual commercial space player, these are the only two games in town. And this company, it's hard. The book obviously tries to put this in context, but this is a country with hardly any military, no aerospace experience at all. You've had a number of American rocket startups that haven't got anywhere nearly as far as Rocket Lab, despite having all this expertise and decades of experience. And so it's this incredible story of this guy who is just very driven. I mean, Peter Beck is, I think of him as like the prototypical engineer. He's just this guy who's almost possessed. He wants to build things. He wants to build the perfect rocket. Um, Through much of the company's early years, it was really him and a couple other sort of friends. But I mean, Peter was doing most of the work and just got incredibly far. And it to me, his is the story that's representative of how far commercial space has come, because something like this would not have been possible 10 or 15 years ago. Part of it is Peter and just being this, I think, kind of like a one in a billion talent, but part of it is the advance of materials, the advance of computing, the financial interest in commercial space. This company just would not have existed 10 or 15 years ago. And if a guy who hasn't been to college can make a rocket in a country that's never made a rocket before, then it was clear to me that we were just in a new era.
Absolutely. Talk a little bit about that new era. You mentioned this couldn't have happened 10 or 15 years ago. You mentioned some of the developments, advancements in material. I think to kind of guide the question that I'm asking here, I think that whenever there's big advances, big leaps in technology, there's excitement and there's also fear. We see it with AI right now. People have a trust for NASA. There's a lot of people who don't trust some of the new tycoons, the Elons out there. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of where can we find trust and faith in private companies and individuals looking into space, as opposed to the old guard, the big government backed agencies?
Yeah, I mean, the central thesis of my book, this is not a book about space tourism. This is not a book about Mars or the moon. My contention is that most of the interesting immediate economic activity is happening in low Earth orbit, the spot kind of closest to us. And, we're moving from a world where we had about 2,500 satellites above us for really the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, the number barely changed. And that number already, just in the last 3 years, has gone from 2,500 to 10,000. It's set to go to 100,000, maybe 200,000. So we're on this exponential curve. I fully believe we are. To me, this reminds me a lot, almost of like the early days of Google, where we had to lay all this fiber, we had to build all these data centers to make our modern computing infrastructure. I think we're doing the exact same thing in space now. We're building a computing shell. It's going to surround the Earth. The pro case for that is things like Starlink, this space internet that will, for the first time ever, we will have this always on fabric that connects everything on Earth, and this dream of like a constant information, um, a fabric, over the entire Earth, connecting everything and connecting people. Half the world's population today can't be reached by fiber. They will get high-speed internet for the first time, and all the economic and education advantages that come with that. The other big bucket is all these sensors that we're putting around the Earth, from mostly cameras and then a lot of environmental sensors that are studying the planet in ways that were never possible before. And so there's a company called Planet Labs that's in the book. They've surrounded the Earth with about 250 satellites. Google used to own part of Planet Labs. And, they can count every single tree on the planet. Not only that, they can tell what type of tree it is. So we know its biomass and exactly how much carbon dioxide the trees are consuming. We can see when there's illegal deforestation in the Amazon, sort of this, um, this level of truth about the real-time accounting of what humans are doing on the planet. I think things like that will be the only way that carbon credits and a lot of these accounting systems we want to put around climate change will work, is to have actual pictures of what's happening to your money and your investments. So that's kind of like the pro case. Like, I think a more connected world, the next
Sure.
stage of our technological evolution, the reason I called it When the Heavens Went on Sale is that space is now a capitalist exercise. And we know historically that when humans have a new territory that they barge into with incredible amounts of money and speed, things don't always go really well. And so you've got basics of satellites possibly colliding into each other and making this area of space unusable. And then now you've got private companies, you've got individuals who have incredible power in space that goes beyond what governments can do. And so this is a brand new era. And I could wax on, especially also about countries like Russia that have been traditional space superpowers that don't seem to have a place in this new world, and sort of how they react to that.
Let me say one thing and then ask another question. I think I read a review of the book recently, and the author of the review said that your book was optimistic in tone. And I liked that. It gave me a kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling in a way to read, and also a sense of inspiration, I guess, around what's coming up. I do appreciate that you've listed, there are, when humans go into a new territory, there are risks, but I do like that, at least to get us thinking, to get the lay audience thinking about the potential in the future. I do appreciate that you focus a lot on the many benefits that we hadn't considered yet. And one of them that you just mentioned, Russia, I wanted to ask about again. Most of us, when we think about the next generation of space travel, we are thinking about Mars. We are thinking about the moon. I thought it was crazy in the epilogue, and you use this phrase that what's happening in Ukraine right now is the first space war. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, the Ukraine war started near the end of my research in the book, and there's this moment that just sort of proved out so much of what I had been reporting about. You had a country, you know, leading up to the war, we had the Russians saying, "Look, we're not going to invade Ukraine," and the U.S. and his allies were saying, they are coming. Well, this time we had pictures. We had all the troops amassed on the border, and these images came from commercial satellite companies, and we could see clearly Russia had people in Belarus. They were about to come in when they first started their invasion. We had more satellite images of the Russian troops getting stuck on their way to Kyiv. Those same images were being used to provide intelligence to the Ukrainian military when the Russians went in to try to take out Ukraine's communications infrastructure. It was Starlink that came in as the replacement for that and provided this fabric to keep the military going, to keep the government going. And so you had this amazing case where it was you had a traditional space superpower in Russia that had space basically turned against it by Ukraine. And it wasn't because Ukraine had invested billions upon billions of dollars into this previously. It was because they turned to commercial companies that had this technology available. We've seen with Starlink, there's been times when Elon wanted to turn it off because he didn't think he was getting enough money. There have been times when it seemed like maybe he was sort of like even pro-Russian and was kind of holding Starlink back from the Ukrainian military. If the U.S. government, if any government wanted to replace Starlink, they just couldn't because they don't have a rival system. So we had this situation where like a company and an individual had become a nation state. So this was sort of the good and the bad that we were talking about before. Is um, huge aid to Ukraine. Russia was put in a very strange position, but also things are not totally under control like they used to be.
Fair enough. Going a little deeper on Ukraine, you mentioned that amazing trip that you were able to take there and gain some really unprecedented access, ICBM locations and things like that. Could you tell us a little bit more about that trip?
Yeah, it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. This was around 2018. Russia had already invaded Crimea. I was mostly in Dnipro, which is very close to Crimea. So I had a bodyguard with a gun around me most of the time. But previously there had been one other Western reporter that had ever been let into like the old. Just to give some context to people, I mean, Ukraine was in many ways like the heart of the Soviet aerospace program. It was the largest producer of ICBMs for the Soviets. They made some of the most famous rocket bodies and satellites in history in Ukraine. And so I got to like go visit the heart of where all this used to take place. And a Western reporter had previously been to the ICBM factory. I don't think anyone had been to the old like secret rocket engine testing grounds in the forest. I had a camera for a documentary that I've been making. Definitely the first time someone had brought a camera in there. And as a kid who grew up largely in the 1980s at the tail end of the Cold War, it was just amazing to see this place that was, I guess, sort of set up to possibly ensure my destruction if need be, and just to be walking around inside of it. And it was also it was incredible to see like how advanced it was in some ways, but also had not changed since like the 1960s. I mean, I went at the rocket engine testing facility. There used to be, I think, 60,000 people that worked there, and it was down to about 2,000. And they were the same people that had been there for decades. And it was, it was quite sad in a lot of ways, but also just like incredible to see with my own eyes. And part of the story is the guy I mentioned before, Max Polyakov. He wanted to take this Ukrainian Soviet space expertise and bring it to the United States. He had bought a bankrupt rocket company in Texas called Firefly, and he was trying to like, it was this amazing dream to unite like the Soviet and the American space technology, old space and new space. And he got pretty far. As I was reporting my book, the U.S. government ultimately really like accused him of being a Russian spy, which I'm quite sure he's not, and threw him out of the United States as I was reporting the book. So it was one of the most dramatic moments I've ever had as a reporter following the story.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think and trying to imagine the vignette there of growing up in the 80s and then getting to visit a place, getting to bring a camera into a place where it probably never has been before, a place that was potentially designed to ensure yours and the nation's destruction if need be. That's a bit of a pilgrimage moment. And you also, in your reporting and your writing, you take great care to, I think, highlight the randomness, almost the places where people come from, the experiences that lead them to unexpected outcomes that are potentially world life changing for so many. I guess I'm wondering, it's been 8 years since we've spoken face to face. Has any of this changed you? Have you changed your perspective on the world, on people? Kind of an open-ended question here, but you seem the same, Ashlee. What's changed, I guess, on your perspective?
I mean, I've seen through the television show and this reporting, I mean, the thread that ties all this together is, yeah, I have the good fortune of being able to spend quite a bit of time in foreign places, looking at both tech history and the cutting edge of tech. And I try to take great care in the book and my other work to tell some of this history and to make these places try to come to life for people, and to show where people came from. You know, I don't think it's fashionable among the tech press. All these trips have actually just made me more optimistic about people, more optimistic about technology. In the time that I've been doing this, I guess tech has become ever more powerful and part of all of our lives. I tend to get just so encouraged that I live in Silicon Valley. I love Silicon Valley. I wrote a book about Silicon Valley history. Um,
Yeah.
it really was like the center of the tech world and still is, but I'm now amazed at how good technology has gotten around the world, how um, creative people are, and now have these powerful tools where something like a rocket lab can come into existence in somewhere that would have been impossible before. And even though, yes, obviously we face serious problems, technology has its scary moments. I actually get encouraged that writ large, I think the world's talent is going to see us through in some pretty amazing ways.
Cool. Yeah, and I hope that me quoting the opinion about the book, saying that it was an optimistic book in tone. I hope that wasn't offensive in any way. I mean, I enjoy it as
No,
well. I think you
yeah,
will.
I try to get into everything, but I'm passionate about this stuff and interested in it, and I am sort of an optimist by nature anyway.
Very cool. You mentioned Astra a while ago. I mean, the access that you had before so many even knew about what was going on, seeing that group grow from the inside. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, okay, so Astra was born out of this idea to make really the cheapest rocket ever, sort of like the FedEx of space. You make $1 million rocket at a factory, pump one out a day, launch one a day. The idea that if we made this more like car manufacturing, the price of access to space just falls dramatically as you kind of get to scale. And so I had a friend who told me about them. They were super secret, but I managed to get in the door, and I made a deal with Chris Kemp, the CEO. He's like, look, I'll let you follow the story. You can write whatever you want, good, bad. It's like, this is either going to end amazingly or horribly. You can follow the journey, but I just don't want you to write anything till we get to orbit for the first time. He wanted the company to be focused. He didn't want to do any PR. I was like, fine. And I'd been dreaming for a long time of really like following a company on that sort of journey, just as somebody who's never built a company. I've always wanted to sort of see what that looks like. And so I got to follow the company from when it was 5 people to hundreds of people. They were in Alameda in a like 1950s era jet engine test facility that was decrepit. The city was about to tear it down. It was full of like old municipal softball team records and chairs from government offices. There was a dead body in one of the electrical panels from this guy who'd been trying to strip the copper wiring. I mean, there's pictures of the book. It was funky to say the least. And to see something go from that to this like ultra modern rocket factory was incredible. And to see the Astra part of the book was so it's probably the funniest part of the book. It might be some of the saddest parts of the book. It was my sort of ode to engineering and like how hard it is to go from like nothing to an actual product, and like the excitement that goes into that, some of the boredom that goes into that, the hard decisions you have to make, sort of the suffering of some of the people. And that's really what I wanted to get across to people, was this journey and what it really takes to build a company, even though some of it is ugly along the way. And so Astra did reach orbit. Um, they did it, I think, faster than any company has in history, which was kind of like what drew me in to the premise. They've subsequently fallen on some tough times. Their next rocket did not do as well, and they're in like a financial sort of fight for their survival at the moment.
I understand. I do think that the journey of starting a company, the trials and tribulations, is conveyed well in that story. I can see why you say it's some of the happiest and saddest moments in the book as well, and I hope that people enjoy it when they get to that part. Um, these different stories and examples with Astra, with the time in Ukraine, um, the level of access, the unprecedented level of access that you've gained in these places and with these people, it's really impressive. And I'm curious if you can talk about how over and over you've been able to, earn the trust of the people involved, where they're sharing, deep moments, very sad moments, some of the most difficult moments of their life with you, and giving you that privileged access. Tell us about how that works.
It's probably like the part that I'm most proud of, I think, with this book. A little bit, I got lucky. I had written this book on Elon Musk that did very well, and a lot of people saw themselves as maybe wanting to be the next Elon Musk. And if this guy was like knocking on your door, it was I think flattering to some degree. Um, so that helped. I think some people I'd known before, some like half of them though I met for the first time, and it was a long time, but like I said, I spent 5 years. I know I spent thousands of hours with some of these subjects, and so you develop a relationship. I mean, it is one of trust. Like Chris Kemp took a huge risk, and I think I've talked to Chris since the book came out. I think um, there's parts of the book that he likes, and there's part that I know he hates. And there's a bit of give and take and risk that comes with that. But I try to always be fair to people. I think my past work shows that, and even in the sort of difficult parts, I really do sort of write it from love, which is like I don't really enjoy hanging out with people that I dislike. I enjoy eccentric people. I appreciate the people. I appreciate people who approach the world differently, and try to just to capture that and let other people make their own choices. The coolest thing about this book is, like, if anyone knows anything about rockets and aerospace, I mean, most of the stuff tends to be top secret. It requires there's government regulation around a lot of this. I think I was lucky that I caught these companies at such a young stage that a lot of that hadn't been formalized. None of them were public yet. They were able to sort of take some more of these risks, but I felt like I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that has been to all these different launch sites around the world, into all these different rocket factories. I kept waiting for like someone from the U.S. government to tap me on the shoulder and sort of like bring me into some secret club. Like I went to India, largely I think because of the Elon book. I was not even. I mean, this sounds bad in some ways. I don't even think they'd let Indian reporters into like mission control and some of the back rooms. I got to sleep at the launch site there. Similar things all around the world, and so just feel super privileged. It was the first time where I felt like, as a reporter, you try to do your best on like a magazine story. I might call whatever 50, 60 people. A lot of what you're reporting has happened before, and you're trying to stitch together this story from other people's point of view and find the truth. This was like the first time where I got to be in the room and sort of know what the truth
Yeah,
was, and so I just felt so much more confident writing about it, and like I was doing like I was able to put other people in the room for what this was like actually like.
for sure. Well, Ashlee, we have about 10 minutes left, just kind of for your knowledge. I want to pivot a little bit here, a little bit less about the book that we've been discussing, a little bit more about you, about the other projects. And you've given me something I'm really curious about. You just mentioned in your last answer this interest that you have in slightly eccentric people, perhaps people with vision, people that you enjoy being around. Um, tell me more about where that came from. Has that always been part of who you are from when you were a kid to now? Tell us more about that.
I'm not totally sure where it came from. If you look at my career, I start writing about pretty hardcore enterprise technology, chips, storage systems, networking. I mean, things I think some people would consider boring, others not. And I always tried to humanize. I tried to make those stories accessible to a wider audience by focusing on the people behind what was going on. And I'm one of those types of humans. My wife will tell you I can go to like any bar or be stuck on some like airport seat next to someone. I love to chat to anybody, no matter who they are, and sort of get into their life stories. And so that's always been, I guess, maybe like the foundation of my reporting, was to get to know people, how their story tied in to whatever they were making. And over time, it just seems like I've gravitated more and more to unusual subcultures and people, really kind of pushing the limits of whatever they do. I just like people on a quest, and I like people who are deeply committed to what they're doing, so much so, that maybe they seem weird to outsiders. I like passionate people who live a passionate life, and I always think of it as like the greatest part of my job is that I get to go inhabit these other universes for whatever it is, 2 months, 2 years, and you get to sort of like have a taste of what somebody else's life is like. It's like such a joy. And so I don't know why it's gravitated so far to extreme people, but that's just what interests me.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Ashlee. Speaking about those opportunities you get to go and travel and spend time in different worlds with different people. I mean, it sounds a lot like Hello World to me. And I guess I started to get into this book. I could see how it feels like a very natural progression or evolution out of Hello World. Am I correct? The next season of Hello World's coming out next month?
Yes, it comes out in September. So for people who don't know, I mean, this is a technology travel show. I think it started out in what I guess is probably like a pretty natural place, was me going to pretty developed countries to show like the cutting edge technology in Australia or Japan. Over time, especially with this season, we have some of that, but we also go to places like Kyrgyzstan, to Nigeria, which does have partially a budding tech scene and partially not. Like, I think we've expanded our horizons to really tell the story of what technology means to people in different places. It doesn't always have to be a rocket or some gene sequencer. Technology is like a central part of almost everybody's lives today, and it means different things to different people in different spots. And so this is the first time I know there's no other show like this, and we went on some pretty like harrowing adventures on some of this. So yeah, there's 11 new episodes coming, one per week.
Can't wait. I've seen a bunch of it over the last few years. It's been really gratifying to see you out there across the world. So I'm looking forward to that. In that vein, also, I was surprised and excited to hear about these documentaries that you're producing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one for HBO is, I had a camera crew come with me throughout most of my reporting for When the Heavens Went on Sale, and so it's a little more focused than the book on a couple of the characters, and HBO limits me on some of what I can say, but it was incredible to be able to like do a book and a documentary at the same time, and I don't think a lot of people get to do that. It was interesting to see these two different mediums and how different they are. That carried me into doing more documentaries. And so then there's another one that I'm working on with Chris Smith, who did Tiger King and a number of other enormous documentaries. We're doing a documentary on Brian Johnson, who's a guy I've written about, he's trying to push the limits of longevity technology. He spends about $2.5 million on his body per year. He's quite controversial, and so we've been following Brian for a few months, and I don't know where that one's going to end up yet, but somewhere good.
I bet. I've definitely followed the news on that one as well. One more question about that. When I think about the kind of context switching or even paradigm shifting that must occur from writing feature articles for Bloomberg and writing books to traveling the world and now getting involved in documentary production, have you found it easy, difficult to balance and manage your time and your commitments? How has your life changed in that way? Your work life, I guess.
It's been a little hectic the first half of this year. Yeah. I mean, like these things all tend to go in fits and spurts. You know, you like record a season of the TV show. So I'm in 2 different countries a month, like 20 days a month for a few months. As you know, that becomes manageable. But then when you throw a documentary on top of that and like a book coming out at the same time, it gets a little hairy. And so, but I tend to, I think the projects are really hot and heavy at different stages, and so you kind of dive into the one that needs the most attention at that time. And I really do just, it's like my wife again thinks I'm crazy sometimes, but and I probably am to some degree. The uh but it's hard for me like not to want to chase all this stuff because I enjoy it all for different reasons.
Yeah, I had wondered about that when you were describing, showing up in Ukraine and having a bodyguard with a gun, and I wonder how the family back at home has thought about that at times.
My wife
But
has concerns. Yeah.
I can only imagine. I have another one or two questions, but we do have a question from the audience I'm going to read to you, Ashlee.
Yeah.
Now, you've written the book about a few companies that are already on their way up. What have you seen in the next generation of space startups? Is it accelerating since the heavens went on sale?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, so we kind of had the wave of a handful of rich people for a second, and then all this venture capital poured in. Some of the space startups were huge beneficiaries of the SPAC craze and got hundreds of millions of dollars. We're seeing like a little bit of fallout from that. So there's a few that have made it. There's others like Virgin Orbit that's already gone out of business and been sold for parts. I mentioned Astra's in some tough times to navigate at the moment. And so, I felt like we saw this first wave of there used to be no private rocket companies. Suddenly there were like 110 you could kind of take seriously. And do we need 10? Maybe we need like two. And which two will those be? I feel like we're kind of winnowing that stuff down on. But along with that, I've never been more convinced that my thesis is right because not only do we have tons of rocket companies now and tons of satellite companies, but just this year we saw a company called Varda Space that's based in Los Angeles. They put up a pharmaceutical manufacturing hub into low Earth orbit. So this is like our first real startup doing manufacturing in space. Things like asteroid mining that seemed crazy and super far-fetched. There's another startup called Astra Forge that launched an actual machine to go burn some rocks in orbit and see what that looks like. And so, I think there's going to be a lot of companies that don't make it, but we are 100% going to find out kind of how real commercial space is and which business cases survive. I also think we're like just super quick. It's like 1996 consumer internet to me. I think we haven't even seen like the fraction of the real ideas that are going to come when you change how much it costs to get to space, you put Moore's law in space, and you have tons of young, bright people thinking about this stuff for the first time.
For sure. Thanks for that answer, Ashley. I'm going to ask you one last question before we wrap up. It's going back to the book now and the way you chose to write it. A little personal tidbit, in tech, I feel the books that get recommended to us to read by friends, by mentors, managers are all nonfiction, self-help, or they're about tech, about better management. There's a lot of dry stuff. And so we all have to have our guilty pleasures. And one of mine is sort of historical fiction. I love the history. I love being able to kind of put myself back in a different time and try to experience the characters and the writing, what it might have been like. But then you get the benefit of fiction in that there's actually stories being told. And something that I took away from this book and your writing in general is it's nonfiction, but it reads a lot like fiction. And I think that, you call it out, I think in the beginning of the book, kind of acknowledging that a lot of the book will allow these characters to speak in first person for stretches of time. Just tell us a little bit about your choices, creative choices around that.
Yeah, I mean, I had the advantage of filming a documentary while we did this, and it turned out to like influence my reporting and my writing. I mean, I tend to spend lots of time with people, but um, I had all these like wonderful recordings and this is great audio, and I like it when people talk in their own voice. I've seen some of the reviewers are like, you took it easy on this guy. You just let them make their whole pitch. I actually think the parts where I let people speak for themselves are some of the like hardest things on the actual people because they're revealing everything about themselves, and it took me like thousands of hours to kind of earn enough trust for people to just open up and talk to you. And I love writing, and I love being able to tell the story the way I want, but there's just something that like I don't think you can replace by hearing some people tell these stories in their own voice. And I think it's like way more revealing about their character. And I've never seen anyone, it's like a little mix of like oral history in with me doing this narrative, especially in the Astra part. And I had a lot of pressure from my publisher and others who told me not to do this, but I wanted to do it anyway, and I'm really proud of it. And I think if people go check it out, it'll be very different to any book you've read.
Absolutely, could not agree more. So once again, when the heavens went on sale, the Misfits and Geniuses Racing to Put Space Within Reach. Please go check it out. Check out Hello World. Look forward to the upcoming documentaries as well. Ashlee, August is our month. I'm going to expect 8 years from now, I'm still here at Google. I think that's 2031, if I'm not mistaken. We'll look forward to the next book.
It's gonna be sooner. I'm gonna make you go sooner.
All right, I appreciate that. This has been a real treat, man. It's good to see you. Thanks for being here.
It's great to see you. Thanks so much for having a chat again. I really appreciate it.
Of course. All right. Thanks everyone for being here.